Okay, so here we're going to make this video of fuel sending unit, non-rally gauge, and the power source is a 9-volt battery that we've ran down to about 5.9, almost 6 volts. Thereabout. It'll run down a little bit as we're using it. But here is a repopped fuel sending unit, fairly older one. This unit had the brass float on it, I think, because the new one I got had the plastic and we swatched it out. I can't remember which. This may be the right one. Anyway, so what we're looking at here is the stops on the sending unit, which go from empty or full to empty. So the way I've got it hooked up is just like the factory would. The power source, I'm just not using a limiter. I'm using a drained battery for 5 volts to act as the 5 volts that would come from the instrument cluster voltage limiter. That way we don't fry the gauge. So as you can see, the gauge is moving. I've just powered it up, ran it up to the full mark. Now I've set this thing up to where I would want full to be on the gauge. So what you can see here is I've bent that tab. It was all the way up and I've bent it down because based on where the stop actually was, and the gauge, since it's slow, it takes a few minutes, but when it stops moving completely, it's about where I wanted it to see it read. It's just a preference. I could have set it to go a little bit past, a lot past, you know, pegged all the way, whichever. But you can tell I have it going just a little bit past the full mark. Kind of gives me, in my mind as I'm driving, that I got a full tank. It's a little reassurance. So it's kind of stopped moving. And so now we're going to operate the sending unit as if we were empty. Now remember, these gauges are slow. They don't react super fast, so just bear with it. See if I can get both in the same picture. So we're moving it. Maybe half a tank. We'll watch the gauge. Still kind of moving, still just about stopped, a little bit past half, depending on how you're looking at it. Okay, so the empty set point here was straight up and down. And if you move the float to where it was stopped at straight up and down, I'll try to zoom in here a little bit. You can see the rod here not actually touching the stop yet, but that's about where it was bent into position for up and down. Now, the interesting part on that is where the gauge actually stops. So the gauge has been moving. It's just barely moving still. Just about stopped. So you can see it's not actually reading completely empty. Alright, so what I did was bent that tab out of the way so I could give it a little bit more. So you give a little bit more, gauge moves. So about empty, but you know, not perfect, depending on how you're looking at it. Still, even more so, to really get it to look like it's empty, you've got to push it past the point to where it probably would never be, and that's smashed up against the filter neck, the inlet neck here. You know, I mean, it's literally just touching, and you can see, maybe you can see, not exactly 100% touching the stop here, but it's close, real super close. Now you can see the gauge is actually reading empty. What sucks about this is that I don't ever think that your tank's going to drop to this low of a level, or with the way this unit sits inside the tank. I think it's going to stop somewhere down here, maybe, depending. I don't know. Can't see the inside of a tank, but I don't think these repop gauges are ever going to properly read empty unless you modify them to where you want them to be. And even then, if you give way on this stop in order to allow it to go even further, it's probably the only way. Reading the full mark, I did have to bend this in order to get it to read where I wanted it to read. It's a matter of preference. And this is an older sending unit. I do have a new sending unit coming. I'm going to try that one and see how accurate it is before I even modify anything. But again, it's a matter of preference where you want it to read or where you think it should be reading on the gauge itself. So there you go. But out of the box, this thing would have never been accurate to the gauge. Not even, I mean, a little bit close, but not accurate at all. It certainly would have never read completely empty, and you would have been out of gas, and your gauge would have said you had an eighth of a tank. So there you go. We'll make another one when the new one shows up. See ya.